So in this presentation, we're going to look at, first of all, why tell stories, then the what makes a good story. That's kind of like some of the ingredients to the recipe. And then the basics of story structure, and then a suggestion of how to write your story. So the first one, why tell stories? And I'd like a bit of interaction here. I'd like you guys to tell me why you want to tell stories. Why are you on this webinar? You can either unmute your. Is that somebody unmuting themselves? You can either unmute yourselves and tell me, or you can type in the chat box. Why are you wanting to tell stories?
Hello?
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 Who's that? I've lost whoever that was. So Charlotte's typed in, because stories inspire me. And that's very, very true. I think all of us can think of stories. I could think of several from childhood growing up. For me, it was stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table inspired me, and also many stories from the Bible. Parag Shah says, because stories make me think. That's very true as well. Amani says, because it's a beautiful and easy way to tell a message. Janice said, it helps us to connect to others. So that's good, and it's good to have a sense of why as well. I keep losing the. There we are. It's good to have a sense of why we want to tell stories. And the fact is our brains are actually hardwired to connect with stories more than any other way of absorbing information. Is that somebody trying to talk? I can't hear very much. Elu Williams says, so the rest of the world knows what we do. That's right. So from the initiatives of change perspective, it's very much about telling the world what we do and what we're about. Janice says that stories also help to heal us from trauma. And Parag Shah says that telling stories releases your pressure if they're your personal stories. That's true, actually, because when we tell our stories, there's a healing thing that goes on for us. If we're burdened by some stress, talking to somebody, telling our story can actually help us, and also helps us to process as we tell our own stories. And it's interesting that all the great religious traditions of the world use stories as one of their main methods of teaching, because when we listen to stories, we are changed, because we enter the story ourselves and we see how it relates to every aspect of ourselves. There's another aspect of why we tell stories, and I just picked up this slide, which is from the business world, that we live in a world where we are bombarded by so much information coming at us all in quite chaotic ways. And it's very hard to make sense of all that information. And stories is the main way we have of making sense of stuff. When we tell a story, we're actually making sense of the information we've got. So there's something in the way a story isn't just sort of a splurging, a vomiting of information like on this whiteboard. It's actually about taking all that information and making sense of it. Any more thoughts on this? Any comments on this picture? Well, yes. E. Williams says that's not organized. Yeah, that's right. So this is like this guy is doing a kind of brain dump. And that's often a necessary thing. Before you write a story, you actually need to get everything, all the stuff out of your head, just put it out on a piece of paper or a whiteboard or whatever. This is the kind of the brain dump, the brainstorming, just getting everything before you organize it. Yeah, brainstorming, exactly. So I want to get across the idea that stories really are about sense making. They're about helping us make sense of ourselves, of the information we have, and of the organizations that we're telling stories for. It helps us as we tell the story to make sense, and it also helps the person who's receiving the story to make sense of the information. So there's much more than just the information. It's about organizing the information in a way that it makes sense. So what are the basic ingredients? We have this metaphor of the ingredients and recipe of storytelling. So all recipes start with a list of ingredients. So the basic ingredients are these six questions. And really, you look at any story, and they will have all of these 6 questions. Who is involved? Who is affected? Who is it for? Who is it by? Then what happened? What was it about? What were the circumstances around it? And what happened after the thing finished? Where did it take place? Is there anything significant about where it took place? When did it take place? That's usually the very easiest one. Why did it take place? And finally, how did it take place? Now, of these 6 questions, which do you think is the most important? Just type your answers. Janice says why. Eliu agrees. Charlotte says why. Parag says why and who. Camilo says why. Janice says and who as well. Yep. Yeah. They are all important, Amani. You're quite right. But I think the why is an especially important one, and it's also the one which we sometimes in our writing reports, especially, we tend to forget. And I see a lot of people writing reports of IRC events, and it's very good. It's a list of it tells you who was there, what happened, where it took place, when it happened, and there's a bit of the process of what happened. But it's often missing the why. And maybe that's because we kind of take it for granted. We kind of assume that because we know why it took place, everybody else will know why. But when you're telling a story, particularly on the internet, where you don't know who's going to be reading it, you need to try and put yourself in the shoes of somebody who knows nothing at all about initiatives of change or the values that it stands for, and really stand in that person's shoes and think for them what would make sense of this report that you're writing. And I think a useful way to think of that is to ask the question, what problems in society or in the world is this thing I'm writing about trying to solve? So let me think. Some recent initiatives of change stories. We might have the School for Changemakers. I'm going to put Charlotte on the spot here. So Charlotte, the School for Changemakers in Liverpool. What would you say is the why for that story? You may need a bit of time to think about this. Okay, so I'm trying to think of an example, Charlotte. So I'm choosing as an example the School for Changemakers. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So for the School for Changemakers, Charlotte, what would be the why for that story? Yeah, it is. It is difficult. And it's often the most difficult thing when we think about writing a report, is to think from the perspective of somebody who's completely outside initiatives of change, why this is significant, why it's important. So okay, so young people are needing something significant to do with their lives. Yeah, that's great. Parag Shah says creating new leaders. I think those are both excellent points. And in fact, leadership is a real big why for a lot of what we do in initiatives of change. There is a lack of leadership in the world, a lack of ethical leadership in particular. And Charlotte says they have a desire to be significant. Yeah, that's also very true. So there's no right or wrong answers here. And each person will have a different perspective, I think, on this why question. But it might be when you start to think about a report, maybe before you do anything else, you actually start to think about the why question. And if you're writing a report and it's not actually an event you've created, then you might ask the event organizers, because they really should have an idea of why they're doing this event. And Janice has commented that, yes, I believe that the word ethical is the clarifying point when using training leaders. Yeah. Yeah, there's a huge shortage of ethical leaders in the world. And if you're stuck, it might be worth also going back to look at the work that was done in the Global Assembly last year on clarifying the framework for common action, because there's some good language there which explains the why of initiatives of change, and particularly this phrase which I love, which is around, I think it's inspiring, enabling, and equipping people to make change or to bring change, starting with themselves. And Parag Shah says, I think there are ethical leaders, but that sense is really not alive, and IFC plays its part there. Yeah, these are all very good points. So have a really good think when you're writing a story about the why. And I would say the clearer you can get on the why of your story, the more compelling the story will be. Because you remember we started by talking about what makes stories different from just giving information is that stories are about making sense. They're about making sense of that information and making sense of the world and making sense of ourselves. So really the why question is about, it's the thing which gives the heart of that making sense. And if you're not really clear on that why, then you're not really making sense out of the information, you're just giving the information. So that might be something before you do anything else when you're writing a story, to think deeply about that why question and ask other people involved in the event why they think it's important, why they think it's significant. And Amani is saying another reason is to release hidden realities. Yeah, I like that. That's very poetic. So these are our basic ingredients. This is, if you like, all the things which we need before we start to make the story. So there might be a little exercise you can do, even like a checklist before you write, to just make sure you can tick off each of these 6 questions. Make sure you've got the information about who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how. And once you've got all the basic ingredients, that is when you can start to go on to putting them together in the recipe which we're going to give you about making a story. So, basic story structure. There's a picture here of people at the cinema. Now, I hope you've all had an experience of seeing a great film in the not too distant past. And cinema stories, I think it's a great example of storytelling. The reason they're so popular and so compelling is they really get this stuff right. So what's the first thing that happens when your favorite film, that's right, Jeff, it's a picture of people about to watch a film. So when a film's, when you sit down and the curtains open, what usually is the first thing that happens in a film? Oh, you can't see the slide yet. It may just be taking a bit of time to get through to you. Okay. So you can see it now. So when the curtains go up and the film starts, apart from the advertising, thank you, Janice, what's the first thing that happens in the film? So Charlotte says that you introduce the setting. And I think that's true. I'm thinking of some of the James Bond films I've seen. I'm a great James Bond fan. And there's always, you plunge straight into, it feels like the middle of something. And this happens even before the opening title credits go up. And Parag has really hit the nail on the head, I think. He said it sets the platform for the film story. So really what we're saying is the very first thing in a compelling story is a really good beginning. And you may be I may be making this too complicated for you, because the basic story structure we're talking about is very, very simple. Every story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that may seem too simple for you, but it's actually very, very important. And we need to think about each of these sections as distinct sections. And as you're writing your stories, be conscious of which part is the beginning, which part is the middle, and which part is the end. Because this is very, very deep in our sense-making brains, is we kind of expect stories to have this basic structure. So Parag's saying, while taking on ingredients, it's the dressing, how you make on the dish. Not quite sure what you mean there, Parag. Anyway, we're going to move on and look at each of these sections in turn. So first of all, the beginning. Now, what is the purpose of the beginning of a story, do you think? What needs to happen right at the beginning? Okay, Farag is saying, and that people would like the dish as soon as they see the dressing. Ah, yes, it's like the something to make your mouth water, an appetizer. So yes, so the beginning has to say what's the point of the story, has to be the trigger, introduce the main characters, yeah, all of these things. Yeah. The beginning is very, very important because if you don't get the beginning right, people won't go on to read the rest of the story. Hi, Tex, welcome. That's very good. So the beginning, Tex is saying, is to catch interest. That's exactly right. The fact is that we live in a world now where we are bombarded by messages, a lot of it commercially driven messages, advertising. And we've got so much information, very often in the form of stories as well, coming at us from all different angles. And particularly on the internet, I've read some stuff that people decide within the first few seconds whether they want to continue reading the story, pick something else just one click away. So the beginning really is about giving enough compelling people hooked. And that's what the James Bond films do brilliantly, I think, when they sort of plunge you right into the middle of a story. And you kind of, your favorite character is about to face certain death within the first few seconds. But in our stories, we're not quite in the same league as James Bond, but we still need to find a very compelling reason within the first 2 or 3 sentences, I would say, for people to want to read the story. And there are various ways you can do that, but I would say if you're clear on the why of the story, the why the story is significant, then that more than anything else will help you to write the first paragraph and create your compelling beginning. So it might be, for example, that you start off by describing the problems that your IFC story is trying to address. And if necessary, go and do some research to show how important that problem is. So some of the things we've talked about in relation to the School for Changemakers in Liverpool, it might be, Charlotte, that we do some research and find out how many current student age, university age people have a sense of purpose, or what their perceptions are of work and the path in life. Something which would sort of make clear the context for why this School for Changemakers is significant and important. Because the more you can draw that sense of this is an important story, it's solving important problems, the more compelling your story will be. So it really comes down to writing a killer first paragraph. And I put that shark in there, not because you need to have a sense of danger necessarily, but when you see the shark coming, you feel motivated to do something. You don't just sort of sit there and think, oh, well, I may sit here or I may not. And our first paragraphs have to have the same creating motivation for people. And you want to motivate them basically to read the rest of the story. So having got which is really, if you like, to sell the story, to persuade people that it's really, really important, we then come on to the middle. And the middle really is where you kind of tell the story. And the important thing about the middle is really about organizing the information. And it's like giving direction, giving people a map through the information. Because if you remember the slide we had earlier, where all the information was just a random mass all over the whiteboard. The task of the storyteller is to arrange that into an order which makes sense. It's about giving a sense of direction to that information that makes sense. And there are various ways you can do that. And this is where the different types of story structure come in. And I'm just going to give a sense, and this is just to refresh what that information is, make sure we get all of this information in the middle of the story, if we haven't already brought it into the beginning. And one of the ways you might first is by doing a brain dump, as we said before, but on those particular questions. So starting here with who, ask that question, who are the people? And you might want to go a bit deeper into Jane here. What's significant about Jane? What's her story? What does she say? There's John. What's his perspective? Then there are some of the more kind of statistical questions for the people who like numbers, like how many people were involved, what kind of people were they, what made it significant. So just unpack that who question first, and then move on to the what question. What happened? How are things before? How are things after the event? What changed? The where question. Think about, what do I need to explain about this place? Is there anything significant about the place where it took place? Very often when you're describing the where, it's an opportunity to actually paint some pictures with words. So you can say it was, if you're just talking about Co, for example, on this magnificent mountain side in Switzerland with panoramic views over Lake Geneva. And it immediately gives people a sense of where it is. Parag's asking whether we're going to mail the PowerPoints to you. What I'm doing, Parag, is I'm actually recording this. So there'll be a video of the whole webinar available. So you don't need to make notes if you don't want to. But if it helps you to make notes as you're going along, then feel free. So with all of these questions, I suggest before you write the story, you start to unpack each of these questions, break it down into a bit more detail. You can either just do this by writing on a piece of paper like this, or if you like to use software programs, there's a free program called FreeMind, which is a mind mapping software. If you Google FreeMind, that's in fact what this diagram here is using, FreeMind. And it's a free bit of software which you can use. So then you make sure you've got all the information in these 6 basic questions. And then it comes to organizing it in a way that makes sense. And there are some possible structures that you can use for this. The one which most people use and which works really well is simply to organize it in terms of time, chronological order. So you start with the thing which happened first, then you go on to the thing which happened next. And a lot of traditional storytelling follows this chronological structure. In the beginning, this happened, and then after that, this happened, and then that happened, and then after that, something else happened, and then at the end, this happened. So most of the time, probably that's what you will do to organize your material, is just put it in chronological order. But there are some times when you may want to choose a different structure, because sometimes just chronological order is not the way which makes best sense. So some other alternative structures are, one is, I just called it here the tower. So this is basically where you kind of like have a list of bullet points, or maybe numbered points. So point 1, point 2, point 3. And it helps if each point is building on the previous information. So if you want to organize your points, think in terms of what should be at the base of the tower, what should then be built on top of that, etc. Any questions so far on those two possible structures for organizing material? Or is that all clear so far? Good. Janice says that's clear. Good. Okay. That's a good question, Liu Williams. Is there a formula for the number of words? I would say my rule of thumb is a story needs to be as long as you need to tell it well. So some stories which have a lot of information will need longer, will need more information. Some stories may need less information. So I don't like to have a kind of a set number of words which every story should have. But just the other side of that is that people's attention spans, particularly when they're reading online, is very, very short. And generally, if you go much beyond 800 words, you've got to be really, really compelling for people to read a story that's longer than 800 words. So if you've got a really great story and you're telling it really well, then by all means go longer. But in general, the shorter you can make your story and still have important information and making sense of the information, the shorter the better. Tex has made an excellent point. A constant challenge is keeping sentences short. Oh boy, this is an important one. In general, sentence may be too long, then almost. If you think a paragraph is too long, then almost certainly it is too long. And if you think your story might almost certainly be too long. Take a look at the newspapers and how they write stories. And particularly look at the what we call in English the tabloid press. I don't know how that translates in other languages, but it's basically the newspapers which don't have a lot of complicated intellectual analysis, but are kind of really meant to be read very quickly. And the way they write stories is very short sentences, very short paragraphs. Sometimes a paragraph can simply be one short sentence. And they do this for a reason, because it keeps people's attention longer. And generally, we don't like to read a lot of stuff. So this is a challenge for all of us, myself included, is how to make it as brief, concise, and yet still conveying all the information that we want to convey. Yeah. And to the point, as Beck says. Yeah. So we've looked at two possible structures, the chronological order and then the stack of points that you're making. A couple of alternative ones which won't be used so often. One is the kind of the ping pong, which is the dialogue style. So where you have two different points of view. So in some stories, this is when you tell the story from one person's point of view, and then you suddenly shift and tell the story from another person's point of view, and then you shift back to the first person and continue that way. Or it can be literally a report and a conversation between two people, or it could be even an interview where you are interviewing somebody and you're asking your questions and giving your perspectives and recording their perspectives as well. And if it's a genuine conversation, that can also be quite an interesting way of organizing information, where you more kind of allow the information to unfold in response to the dialogue, in response to the question you're asking. And the last, which probably isn't going to be so relevant for reporting initiatives of change stories, but it's the classic melodrama. So this is the hero's journey, if you like. So, the writer Joseph Campbell wrote about this a lot. You find it a lot in mythology all around the world, but it's basically you have the hero who has their normal life, and then something happens to challenge them, and the hero then has to overcome these challenges. They go on a journey, and in the course of that journey, both the hero and the situation are changed. So that may be a bit too complicated for some, and even I've never written a real melodrama type, heroes type story, but it is there as one of the classical story structures. But as I say, most of the time I think we'll be doing chronological order, because that's a very easy one to do, and it's one which people are used to reading stories in that way, and it makes sense. So that's really about organizing your material in the middle of and telling the story. And it's important when we're telling stories to really give our readers signposts. Think of your job as a storyteller as you're taking you on a journey through the forest, and it's really important that they don't get lost. So you might have a clear idea of where you're going because you're writing the story, you know what the story is. But these signposts are really kind of things at the beginning and ends of paragraphs. So if it's chronological story structure, you might simply say things like, and after, where you're literally just like creating a sign for the reader to say, now on to the next bit of time. If you're doing bullet points or if you like, the number points are the signs themselves. But be conscious always when you're writing that you're leading your reader on a journey, and you've got to make it as easy for them, as clear for them as possible. Parag is asking, what should be the ratio of photos to text? That's a great question as well, Parag. Again, I don't think there's any clear answer, but photos are always, if you've got good quality photos. It's a sad reality, but people's attention span for reading and even for listening to words is getting shorter and shorter. Very, very visual. So if you can get lots of good photographs, then the more photographs, the better. In fact, you could even do a photo story where you basically, the heart of the story is the photographs, and you just have very short text linking the photographs. And that can be a very compelling story to read. Charlotte says it's a great question. She really wants to see more photo stories in IFC. Yeah, big photographs. Big photographs, good quality photographs, absolutely. And I never really want to post a story if there are no photographs to go with it. So when you're thinking about reporting IFC stories, please do think photographs as well as the actual written words. A lot of these things, it really helps if you think about them even before the event. So thank you. Getting talked about stories having a beginning, a middle, and an end. So what do you think the end is about? How should stories end? Yes, the main message. The board says, with suspense. Call to action. Yes, very good, Sex. That's something we don't do very well in IFC stories. Clear direction. These are all very good to motivate further thoughts and reflections. Yes. And an open time text says lessons learned, says like a Zen end. I'm going to ask you to expand on that as well. What's the Zen ending? I suspect it may be similar to an open ending. Happy ending with clear message. Camilla says to not give all of the answers. That triggers, leaves you thinking. Yes, I like that. So I guess one of the things which we can take just from this discussion is that there is no single way to end your story. And it will depend on the story, and also depend on what your purpose for writing the story is. Text's point of a call to action is a good guiding principle, though. So when you're writing your story, and particularly when ending your story, think, what do you want your reader to do as a result of reading the story? What do you want your reader to do, or think, or change as a result of reading the story? And that will then influence how you end the story. So if you want them to think about questions in relation to their own life, then that will be how you end the story. By perhaps spelling out some of those questions, which are questions for reflection. They can either in your words as the author, or they might be questions which were voiced by some of the participants. If you want your readers to give financial support to this project, then end by saying you can donate to this project by clicking on this link. And that's a good call to action as well. What were some of the other? Sorry. So Maud's point of ending with suspense, I get what we used to call a cliffhanger. Believe them waiting to read the next exciting installment, next exciting adventure, what happens next. And yes, if you're writing a story which is part of an on, it might be a good way to end it, because the thing you is to read the next part of the story, read what happens next. So just to recap, thinking about how you want your audience to respond, what action you want them to take, that will really determine how you end the story. And make sure you're consciously writing an end of the story which has, in the end, those actions that you want the reader to take, whether it's thinking about something in their own lives, making a change, giving money, supporting an event, or making sure they come back and read the next story, whatever it is. And in saying that, we now come to the end of this webinar. We've gone slightly over our 45 minutes. Any comments or questions before I give you your homework before the next webinar, which will be in about 3 weeks' time? Thank you, Parag. Janice asked, do these rules also apply for dialogue story sharing? To an extent, yes, I would say, Janice. Although in a dialogue you're more kind of unfolding a conversation, it's still good, I think, to be conscious of what you want the reader to get out of it, and end on that if you can. So thank you. And Yilu asks, how many edits do you go through? It depends how. I think if you write your story and you go through this process of thinking, first of all, what is the why? Unpacking those 6 questions, making sure you've got all the information, and then thinking how you're going to structure it. If you do that, you're much more likely to get it right on the first time, because a lot of it is about organizing your material in a way that makes sense. If you just, without thinking about that stuff first, if you just sit down and write, then you probably will have to go through a lot of edits before you get it right. So what I'm suggesting is that you actually do some preparation work and thought before you sit down and write a story. So thank you all for your kind comments. Your homework for the next webinar will be to practice this. And I would like you to write a story of between 300 to 500 words. It can either be a genuine IFC event that you've attended recently, or it could be, if you haven't attended something, an imaginary event. But I would like you to have a go at writing a story where you incorporate all of these principles. So the 6 questions, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And you think about how you are going to organize the material, and that you have a clear beginning, middle, and an end. And if you send those stories to me before the next webinar, I will give you some coaching on your writing, and we'll unpack those stories and maybe go into a bit more detail about some of the other techniques you can use when writing. And that's one of the things which we will talk about next time, Yilu, is headlines, very important. So text, the next one you should have had in the same email that went out initially. There were the 2 dates. I will just quickly, no, I won't jump online because if I do that, I'll leave this webinar. Charlotte, do you know offhand when the next one is? I know it's in about 3 weeks' time. There will be another email reminder going out. And I hope that as many of you can manage to get on that webinar. Thank you, Lilu. 8th of October. Thank you all. So look forward to seeing you on the 8th of October, and email me your stories before then to get some good coaching and feedback on them. And thank you all for your participation. And I'm going to stop the recording now.